Welcome to Ping 24 Updates, your daily dose of what's happening around the world. Subscribe my channel and press the bell icon for more updates. Manila, September 15, 2025. As the first light crept over the city, the air was thick with more than just the usual humidity. There was a tension, a sense that something monumental was about to unfold. The city's heartbeat seemed to quicken, echoing the anxiety and anticipation that gripped its people. The city was electric with anger, not just humidity. Streets that were once filled with the sounds of daily life now pulsed with the energy of thousands, their voices rising in unison. The headline was everywhere: Manila erupts. Protests against corruption swamped the capital. Newspapers, social media feeds, and whispered conversations all carried the same message. The people had reached their breaking point. This wasn't distant politics. It was a nation's raw cry of betrayal. The anger was personal, etched into every face, every shout, every clenched fist. Chants echoed between high-rises, a pulse of discontent reverberating through the concrete canyons. The city itself seemed to vibrate with the collective outrage. People from all walks of life filled the streets, their signs telling stories of frustration and fury. Students, parents, workers, and elders, each had their own reasons, but all were united by a shared sense of injustice. The city felt like a powder keg, ignited by a scandal that hit home. Every corner, every alley, was alive with the possibility of change, or chaos. This was about water, money, and broken promises. The essentials of life had been gambled away by those in power, leaving ordinary citizens to pay the price. Police in riot gear formed a silent barrier, but the real force was the crowd. The tension between authority and the people was palpable, a standoff that could tip at any moment. They demanded answers about a failed flood control system, sabotaged not by nature, but by corruption. The city's vulnerability had been exposed, not by a storm, but by greed. Public funds meant for protection had allegedly been siphoned off. Billions vanished, leaving neighborhoods defenseless when the rains came. For a country battered by typhoons, a working flood system is survival. Without it, every storm becomes a disaster, every downpour a threat to life and livelihood. Protesters marched not just against corruption, but for their homes and future. Families walked side by side, children on shoulders, all demanding a safer tomorrow. The day began with foreboding and ended in defiance. From dawn's anxious whispers to dusk's determined chants, the city refused to be silenced. Elderly women, students, office workers, and farmers stood shoulder to shoulder, united in their demand for justice. Generations came together, their differences set aside for a common cause. The scandal was no longer confined to reports, it had spilled onto the streets. News cameras captured every moment, broadcasting the people's outrage to the world. Manila was on edge, a nation demanding to be heard, and the world was watching. International headlines flashed images of defiance, and the city's struggle became a symbol of resistance. This protest was not just a moment, it was the start of a reckoning. As the sun set over Manila, the people's voices promised that this fight for justice was only beginning. Liwasang Bonifacio became the stage for a new chapter in Philippine history. On this day, the city's heart pulsed with the energy of thousands who refused to remain silent. The square, once a symbol of past revolutions, was now alive with a renewed sense of purpose and hope. The crowd was a mosaic: students, activists, farmers, and the urban poor, all united. Each face in the crowd told a different story, yet all were bound by a shared desire for justice and change. Their voices blended into a single powerful chorus that echoed through the city streets. Farmers spoke of crops lost to preventable floods, urban poor, of homes washed away. Their stories were not just statistics but lived realities, painful reminders of government neglect and broken promises. The air was thick with emotion as survivors recounted nights spent in evacuation centers and dreams washed away by rising waters. A young mother's sign read, "My child's future is not for sale." Her eyes, filled with both fear and determination, captured the urgency of the moment. She stood not just for herself, but for generations yet to come, demanding a better tomorrow. Office workers joined on their lunch break, tired of seeing taxes squandered. They left their desks and routines behind, trading spreadsheets for placards, and their presence signaled that the call for change had reached every corner of society. This was a collective roar, not a single group's protest. The chants and songs rose above the noise of traffic, uniting strangers in a common cause. For a moment, differences faded, replaced by a sense of shared destiny. Civil society leaders took the mic, demanding transparency and accountability. Their words cut through the air, calling out those in power and inspiring hope among the crowd. Each speech was a spark, igniting new resolve in those who listened. The crowd responded with raised fists and thunderous approval. Cheers and applause rippled through the masses, a wave of solidarity that seemed unstoppable. Every shout was a promise. We will not be ignored. This was a movement, not just a march. It was a living, breathing force, growing stronger with every step. The streets became rivers of people, flowing with determination and hope. As the protest moved toward the presidential palace, numbers swelled. The city watched as the tide of people surged forward, their resolve unbroken, their message growing louder with every block. Onlookers joined spontaneously, the protest growing with every step. Shopkeepers, students, and passers-by found themselves swept up in the momentum, compelled to add their voices to the call for change. The message was clear: the Filipino people were awake and watching. No longer content to stand by, they demanded to be heard, their eyes fixed on those in power. This was a public awakening, a declaration that the old ways were over. As the sun rose over the crowd, hope mingled with defiance, signaling a new dawn for the nation. The demand for change was impossible to ignore. Every sign, every chant, every raised fist was a testament to the people's resolve. The call for reform echoed off the walls of government buildings, impossible to silence. The people's voices rose against the tide of corruption. Together they stood as one, undaunted, unafraid, and unwilling to let history repeat itself. This was the sound of a nation reclaiming its future. Public anger boiled over after the government slashed funding for critical flood control projects. The timing was disastrous. Just as typhoon season intensified, delays and broken promises had plagued these projects for years. Essential defenses like seawalls and drainage systems were left unfinished. The budget cuts felt like a final insult, confirming the government's misplaced priorities. Then came bombshell corruption allegations. Delays weren't just incompetence, but part of a scheme to extract illicit funds. The idea that lives were gambled for profit was infuriating. People saw the floods as man-made tragedies, not just natural disasters. The system seemed rigged against them at every level. The protest was a direct response to this perfect storm of failure. The people demanded answers and action. The anger in the streets wasn't just directed at a single administration. It was a powerful condemnation of decades of corruption that had seeped into every level of government. The frustration was palpable, echoing through the city as people gathered to make their voices heard. Protesters didn't just blame the current leaders, they pointed fingers at both current and former governments, seeing the latest scandal as merely the most recent symptom of a much deeper, long-standing disease. For many, this was the culmination of years of broken promises and repeated betrayals. Banners and placards called out officials from every political party, reflecting a deep cynicism that had taken root. The crowd's message was clear: corruption was not confined to one group but had become a bipartisan problem, infecting the entire system. Major contractors were also named and shamed, accused of colluding with politicians to inflate costs, siphon off public funds, and deliver shoddy, substandard work. The public saw these alliances as a key reason for the country's crumbling infrastructure. Public infrastructure, roads, bridges, flood control, had become a private piggy bank for the powerful. Instead of serving the people, these projects lined the pockets of a select few, leaving ordinary citizens to deal with the consequences. Speakers took to the stage, reminding the crowd of past scandals that had rocked the nation. They drew a direct line from history to the present, showing how the same patterns of abuse and impunity had repeated themselves over and over. A culture of impunity had allowed corruption to fester for generations. With little fear of consequences, those in power had grown bolder, believing they could act without accountability. The demand from the streets was for a fundamental overhaul of the system itself, not just the punishment of a few scapegoats. People wanted real, lasting reform that would prevent future abuses. The crowd demanded accountability from everyone involved, politicians, bureaucrats, and contractors alike. No one was to be spared from scrutiny, and no one was above the law. The blame game was over. The call for justice had begun in earnest. The people were no longer content with empty promises. They wanted action, transparency, and real consequences for wrongdoing. United by outrage and hope, the people stood together, demanding real change. Their message was unmistakable. Enough was enough, and the time for true reform had finally come. Senate hearings turned whispers of corruption into public record. Whistleblowers, engineers, and former officials described a system where kickbacks, were the norm. No major contract was awarded without standard operating procedure bribes, sometimes up to 30% of the budget. Documents and messages corroborated their claims, shocking the nation. Contractors were forced to use preferred suppliers, inflating costs and compromising quality. Kickbacks were hidden through ghost projects and falsified reports. The hearings revealed a criminal enterprise at the highest levels. The public's worst fears were confirmed, fueling the protests. The demand shifted from outrage to prosecution and reform. The scandal didn't just expose theft, it shattered public trust. In a country battered by typhoons, trust in flood defenses is a matter of life and death. The revelation that these systems were compromised by greed struck at the heart of the social contract. With typhoon season looming, anxiety soared. Would the seawalls hold or fail due to corruption? The government, once a source of reassurance, became a source of fear. Cynicism and helplessness spread. Faith in institutions crumbled. The crisis of trust threatened national stability. Rebuilding it would require more than words, it demanded real action. Under mounting pressure, the Secretary of Public Works resigned, denying personal involvement but accepting responsibility. Protesters saw it as a victory, but not enough. Activists feared he'd become a scapegoat, leaving deeper issues untouched. The president announced an independent commission to investigate the scandal. Its mandate, a top-to-bottom review with power to subpoena and recommend charges. The move offered a glimmer of hope for real accountability. For the first time, there was a sense that justice might be possible, but optimism was cautious. Past commissions had failed before. The nation watched, demanding results, not just promises. The next steps would determine if hope was justified. The government suspended all flood control projects aiming to halt corruption. The pause, though well-intentioned, left vulnerable communities exposed. Half-finished seawalls and clogged drains became symbols of dread. The suspension's human cost was immediate, no protection as storms approached. Corruption had paralyzed the system, making even honest work difficult. Experts warned that delays could be catastrophic if a typhoon struck. The city held its breath, hoping for the best, fearing the worst. Protesters demanded a swift, transparent review to resume safe projects. The cure for corruption was causing its own pain. The people hoped the investigation would finish before the next storm. The scandal united the nation in outrage. The Catholic Bishops' Conference called corruption a grave sin and urged action. Business leaders warned that graft threatened economic stability and growth. Former officials and justices called for prosecutions and deep reforms. The demand for accountability was now mainstream, not just activist-driven. The independent commission carried the weight of national expectation. The public wanted more than resignations. They wanted arrests and stolen funds returned. The hope was for decisive action to finally break the cycle of corruption. The nation's eyes were on the investigation's outcome. The call was clear: restore honor to public service or face the people's wrath.